What's up, guys? This is the Honest Outlaw here, and today we're going to be talking about the top 5 best guns for cold weather. Now, I've got a lot of experience at that, and we're trying to be pretty authentic here, so be wary of a little wind noise here or there. We're struggling with some of our equipment because we're trying to be authentic, and we're filming this during an actual blizzard in Iowa in February. Right now we have a wind advisory, a snow advisory, an ice advisory, and a wind chill advisory as well. So it's about -10 here or so right now, with a blizzard going on and about 30-mile-an-hour winds, which makes it feel like, 30-ish below zero. What we're going to do during the testing is we're going to go out and shoot some guns that I believe are the best in cold weather, make sure we prove it to you guys right in front of the camera, and then give you some of the other reasons why I think they're great for cold weather choices as well, as long as their track record and maybe their military service. Before we do that, I want to mention my patron supporters. Thank you guys very much. It's because of you guys that we can afford to do cool gun videos like this. You guys help me buy ammo and guns for the videos. Appreciate you guys so much. Because of that, we do some exclusive content on the Patreon page, and I make sure and try to answer all of your direct messages. So if you have a gun question for me, or if you just want to help out the channel, all you got to do is go to the link in the description and sign up. Also in that description is a link to a local shelter in Ames, Iowa that I like to support. It's the YSS. They're a youth shelter. They could really use your support now more than ever. And finally, there's a link to some t-shirts, some mugs, some neck gaiters, and all that cool stuff that the missus made for you guys. And if you're interested in some Honest Outlaw swag, all you gotta do is go down there and click that link and it'll bring you right to it. Now, I wanted to give you a couple of honorable mentions and then talk about some of the reasons why I chose the actual top 5 that I chose. So I have lived in Iowa most of my adult life, and I'm also a hunter. And I also work outside for a living. I was a tree trimmer for many, many years, so I am one with the cold, so to speak. I often worked up in 50 to 60 feet in the air in below zero temperatures, so not only did it help me get my clothes right, but it helped me give a better concept of what works and what doesn't in the cold weather. On top of that, while you're hunting, deer season in Iowa is in December, and most of hunting season is all throughout the winter, so you have to pick your firearms and gear choices in order to work extremely well in the cold. On top of that, now for the last 5 years, I have tested guns, and I test them all year round, and I make sure to test them in climates like this just to make sure they work. If you have a gun reviewer in Texas and you live in Texas, that's great. He'll experience the weather you experience. But in Iowa, we actually get the ability and sometimes the torture of shooting in all conditions. Iowa gets 100, 110 in the summer, and it can get to -40 degrees in the winter. There's not only reliability to consider, but there's usability as well. When you're talking about a gun in cold weather, you want it to work, but you also want to make sure to pick the appropriate lubricant. So lubricant really make or break firearms depending on what temperature that you're in. Some lubricants like grease, for example, works better in hot weather with certain particular guns, things like that. I personally like Slip 2000 or Break Free and stuff like that for the winter, but wherever you live, you're gonna have to pick your lubricant based on whatever climate or temperatures and or adverse conditions you find yourself in. Another thing you're gonna have to really consider when you're talking about picking a particular firearm is track record. Have people tested this in cold weather before? And usually with military service guns like the 1911, they have. The 1911s actually went through World War I and World War II, very cold conditions in both of those particular wars. And on it goes, including the Glock, the SIG 226. Anything that's been through military trials is usually pretty good to go, but sometimes they base that on price as well. Now, the features that I was talking about that I'm going to explain a little bit more when I go out there are, number one, I like iron sights on a handgun for cold weather. And the reason for that is most, if not all, pistol optics have an open design where snow can get in there and does get in there really, really frequently, even if holstered. So if the gun is holstered and it's sitting like this, the optic is actually sitting up in the air, and the optic is obviously not covered by the holster in most cases, and snow just gets down in there, and then when you pull your gun up, all you see is a bunch of red stars all over the place, and you can't see anything. Now, the binding aim concept that most people are going to talk about after I say that, yes, you can aim with your left eye while you simultaneously superimpose the target with your right eye, and that does work. But you know what works better? Iron sights that don't have snow on them. Another thing you're going to have to consider is contrast. When I was deer hunting many years ago, I was using a Remington 870 with white target sights on it, and anything with white target sights in a blizzard is not going to work very well because you want that contrast, especially in that stressful moment. You want to be able to focus on that front sight, and you want to need all the help you can get A red fiber optic's not quite as durable as something like an HD sight from Trijicon or a Mariglow Spartans or something like that, where they have HD red paint on them, and then not only will your fiber optic not break, but that sight will be there all the time. Even if it's covered in snow, you can give it a quick smack or give it a quick tap and it's good to go. Trigger guard's a thing to concern yourself with, which is why the 1911 for me is at an honorable mention. It didn't make it in the top 5, even though it's probably my favorite gun of all time, because I can't get my big old fat ogre finger in there with gloved hands on because of how the trigger guard and the trigger work together. You can see that it's got an amazing trigger, but I just can't get my finger in there with enough distance to really gauge when the shot's gonna go off or not. Oftentimes when I shoot a 1911 in the cold, once I stick my trigger finger in there, the gun goes off by accident. That is not what you want. So you're gonna want a gun like a CZ, for example. A lot of double action pistols, just by the nature of their action, have a little bit bigger trigger guard, and they have a tendency to work better with heavy gloves. Another honorable mention that we're gonna have here on the channel, or on this list rather, is going to be breech action shotguns, because none of the shotguns actually made it on the list as well, although I've used shotguns many times successfully in the cold. Now, one of the reasons why I don't like shotguns as far as reliability goes is because of the plastic ammunition in itself has a tendency to cause malfunction, especially if left loaded for a long period of time. But in the cold, it can make a relatively reliable gun very unreliable very quickly. I'm a huge fan of semi-auto shotguns, but in my personal experience, they're probably the most unreliable platform overall. I've also had some issues getting stuff in pump action shotguns. Remington 870 was my hunting shotgun for many years, and occasionally I would have problems getting debris inside the action. If you're gonna pick a shotgun for cold weather, and particularly for a hunting purpose, a breech action's not so bad. Now they have double action, and they have double barrels, and they have triple barrel shotguns, which is actually kind of fun. But the breech action, the reason why I trust it so much is not only because it's completely closed off design, where you can only really get stuff in the barrel. For me, very time tested, and I kind of just wanted to show off this particular gun here, which is a Harrington and Richardson. This is actually the first shotgun my dad ever bought me, and I have shot many, many deer with this. This is a 20 gauge single shot shotgun that you would think would be very ineffective because it simply has a bead sight, and you get these for like $100. However, this thing is gonna work in almost any condition whatsoever, and the payload that it delivers with a 20 gauge slug is very, very lethal. And on top of that, the accuracy that you can achieve with the 24-inch barrel with just a bead sight on the front, if you have a little bit of practice, is pretty impressive as well. I can consistently hit 8-inch plates or so at 100 yards, which is the kill zone of a deer, with no issue whatsoever. So I just wanted to give it a little bit of an honorable mention and just kind of explain how more complicated designs sometimes are not better in adverse conditions. With that said, we'll get into the shooting portion now, which is going to be a little bit more fun because you can go and watch me suffer. Runs good. All right, so let's step it up a notch. The AR-15's a real closed up design, and that's really beneficial for adverse conditions like 10, 15 below in the middle of a blizzard. So one of the great things about it is, even though it's got a bad history of being unreliable due to poor maintenance, poor ammunition choices, things like that, the design itself actually works really well. Check this out. Gun's been sitting out here for a half an hour at 10 below, completely covered in snow. This is a $600 AR-15, and it works great. Now, one of the things you want to think about when you get an AR-15 for cold weather is going to be optics choice. So make sure that you get everything kind of stone cold reliable, but then when you get to your optic, get something that's completely enclosed, like this Hollow Sun, or maybe an Aimpoint T2, All the Aimpoint products work really well. Coincidentally, they're made in Sweden or Switzerland, either one. It's cold as shit there. And stuff like EOTech, Trijicon SROs, you can't just wipe the stuff off real quick and run the optic. The other thing is, even with an enclosed optic, a lot of times they get so clogged up with snow and ice that it's good to have a quick detach system on them that you can operate with thick gloves. So if you want to, you can ditch the optic and just run the iron sights. Most applications, it's not important. Middle of a blizzard, it's pretty applicable. Guns like the AK pattern rifles. This is actually a VZ58, but it's the closest thing I have currently to an AK that is in working configuration. I've got one, but it's tore apart. And these guns in particular are not only proven just by outdoorsmen, hunting and things like that, but these are well proven in military service, just like the AR-15 is. The only thing I would consider to be more proven in cold climates would be something like maybe the HKG3. It's a roller delayed system. It works very, very well. I actually have an MP5, which is why we're going to do a little honorable mention of that, although I don't have a G3. But the AK system, unlike the AR-15, is not quite a closed up design, but the AR-15 has very tight tolerances, so if stuff does get through that closed off design, it has a tendency to cause stoppages, whereas the AK, it's a very loose internal design. That's a broad description, but if you get stuff in there, it's a little bit more lenient with stuff like that. So we'll run it here real quick. VZ58 is one of my favorite AK pattern rifles. This is obviously running 5.56. Throw the safety on here, which is in reverse, and we'll put it in the snow. As you can see, no problems. 10 below zero. Tons of snow, tons of stuff in the gun. It doesn't care, it just runs. Next up is gonna be the classic bolt action rifle. This is a Savage Axis 223 here. Probably the cheapest rifle, or at least bolt action you can get on the market currently. That's actually why I bought it. We're gonna be doing a separate video on it. This gun out the door, even during the 2021 issues, was $275 at my local store. The cool thing about bolt actions is they are proven throughout World War I, World War II, on into the Korean War, Vietnam War, all the other conflicts that don't include the United States. The Mauser action in particular is an extremely reliable and robust action, and that's why it continues today and has been produced almost more than any other gun besides the AK series of rifles. In there, but as you can see, it runs relatively well. The reason for that is when it gets frozen up, you see the first one kind of ran through, it got a little frozen, a little tight, a little frost lock there. You can beat on it and you're not going to break the action, and you can run it yourself manually and not have much of an issue. All right, now there's a couple of factors that you might want to consider when you're buying a gun for basically the Arctic Circle. One of those is going to be, is it easy to operate with gloved hands? Can you operate the action with thick gloves? Can you get your finger in the trigger guard with thick gloves? Can you reload it if necessary with thick gloves? And that's one of the reasons why the bolt action works so well. Even though you're not going to be able to load the internal magazine all that well, you can port load it relatively easily. Now, obviously this is going to obscure my optic, but if you're going to be running a bolt gun in Arctic weather, I would recommend a 1-power red dot most likely, and or simple iron sights. As you can see, we take one round, drop it in there, and then of course fuck it up on camera for you. go.
Okay.
All right, next up here we have the Glock pistol. This is a Glock 19. We're running Glock 17 extended magazines. This is a Gen 5, doesn't really much matter. I firmly believe the Gen 5s are as reliable as any other Glock, but if you're really looking for the time-tested and proven design, maybe go for a Gen 3. Glock has to be mentioned in this list simply because it is probably the most reliable, popular pistol ever made. It's the most popular pistol ever made, really the king of handguns. It is in service with more military and police than just about any other handgun that has ever existed, and it has served tons of time in far north, very cold situations, including being chosen by people like the Alaskan police and things like that. So we're going to run it through here real quick. Now, one of the downsides to the Glock pistol and the Glock 19 for me is the gloved hands things that we talked about earlier. It's difficult for me to get my finger in the trigger guard with these big, thick gloves, although it is possible. And the option we have after this is a little bit better at that. See, this is not a Gucci Glock. I own a lot of Gucci Glocks, I'm a fan, but the reality is that the more holes you have in your slide, the more shit you can get into your slide. I'm also a big fan of optics. The Trijicon SRO is one of my favorite optics, the Trijicon RMR, the Holosun 507 series. The reality is though, if you get snow on those, they're not easily taken off and they're not easily wiped out by a dam site, and you're gonna have all kinds of stuff in the middle of your optic picture. People say that you can use the binding aim concept, where you can kind of look at the target with one eye and then look through the optic, and you can do that if you take a scope and put your scope covers on. You can see that you can still see and acquire the target. I'm not the biggest fan of that, in all fairness, because I like to have all the situational awareness possible. I just like to have everything working for me, so I like to run the iron sights. If you really want to have a really good snow setup, you can have high def iron sights, and that way you can have contrast on the snow. These Glock white sights are very hard to see.
Hopefully you can find it.
Yeah, right? Runs like a champ. Now, if you're looking for a handgun for winter carry, I don't think you can do any better than this. This is my actual winter carry gun, and that's coming from a guy who's probably tested and shot every major pistol on the market at least 1,000 times. I personally love this gun. This is the CZP-07. There's a couple of features to it that I really like that make it a really, really good winter carry gun. One of those little bit bigger grip, I like that. It's got a gigantic trigger guard, which makes it really easy for gloved hands. I also like the fact that it's a double single action pistol, so it has double strike capability. If you get any snow or anything on the primer or anything like that, you need to hit that round twice, you can do so because you can just simply pull the trigger again and it'll hit that same round. Striker fired pistols are not able to do that. On top of that, it's got iron sights, so no optic to obscure with snow, and it has a fiber optic sight, which makes it very easy to acquire in a snowstorm. Running good so far, but how's it gonna do with a little adverse conditions? Now I dropped that hammer to decock, not fully cocked. So what we're gonna have is we're gonna have a little bit of snow on the back of that firing pin there, and hopefully the gun will run well. We'll see. Problem for the CZ. There's something to be said for not only pistols that have served military service and had a good amount of time to adapt and overcome to those conditions, those particular conditions those guns have been put through, but guns in general that are made by companies that make military service guns generally have a higher spec as well. Honestly, they just make guns that are kind of designed for stuff like this. But if you really want to have a gun that you can survive in the Arctic Circle with, Personally, for me, I would take an AR-15 and a CZP-07. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Please help out Air Like Home Shelters, and remember to recycle. I'll check you later.